Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very senior professional, a senior educator from San Diego, USA, Dr. Tara Ceranic Salinas. Tara, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Salinas is the professor of business ethics and the chair of the management department of the Knauss School of Business, University of San Diego. She has published several papers and she's been awarded, recognized, and felicitated several times. So, Tara, before we get into the subject of business ethics, tell me a little bit about your own journey and what got you interested in the subject of ethics.
It was a winding path. I never thought that I was going to be a professor. That was never, ever my plan.
Okay.
And I got a master's degree, which allowed me to teach. And by absolute luck, I was offered to teach a recitation section of undergraduate business ethics class. And after my first day in the classroom, I had found what I wanted to do. It just clicked and it made sense. And I went home and I started applying to doctoral programs right away.
Wow. Okay. And the rest, as they say, is history.
20 years later, I'm still doing it and I love it. And I'm very glad that I randomly got thrown into a classroom.
Fascinating. So, how do you define ethics?
So this is where I start my class every year. And we talk about the fact that ethics is these agreed upon standards. And they are a part of your community or your society or a particular group. But I sort of see them as the lowest common denominator. You can go far over and above those ethical standards, but these are the sort of lowest hanging fruit in terms of behavior. And when we talk about business ethics, it is exactly that taken into the workplace. I think that a lot of times there's a misconception that somehow your morality or the ethics of your community are different than business ethics, and they should not be. And when there's that disconnect, I think that's when ethical problems arise in companies.
And why do you say ethics is so important?
Well, I say it's important because I studied it for so long, but without ethics, it's everybody for themselves. It's chaos and anarchy because we haven't agreed upon some standard of behavior. If someone else thinks it's okay to steal and I don't, well, without some general guidelines saying your behavior is not okay, people are going to do whatever they want, whenever they want. And some people might hear that and think, well, that sounds wonderful. But that is not the way to run a successful society from at least my point of view.
I completely agree with you. And I know, let me ask you something I was confronted with when I was 22 or 23 years old in my first job. I remember someone walked up to me and a supplier and said, I've got you 12 bottles of scotch because he must be. And I said, are you trying to bribe me? And I had him thrown out of the office and said, don't ever let this guy enter again. But then I got thinking, I said, if he had brought to me 12 apples, I may have said, okay, I'll accept it. And I said that there is something which I defined in one of my books as my own threshold of conscience. So my threshold was 12 apples. Someone else maybe 12 bottles of scotch. Someone else maybe 12 million rupees or whatever. I'd love to get your perspective on how does one differentiate in the gray area of ethics and honesty, because there is no gray.
Well, and I think the example that you give is very common. In the US, maybe it's tickets to a basketball game. It's courtside seats.
Correct.
And a lot of organizations are trying to create a framework in the company for what do you do in this situation. And what I find is that companies that have really good, thoughtful ethics programs, they support their employees and they say, okay, you can accept a gift with a face value of $100 or less. And anything other than that, and I think this is such a great way to do it, anything other than that goes into sort of a pool at the company and things get raffled off.
Correct.
So it takes the responsibility off of the individual, because if you would have taken those 12 bottles of scotch and someone found out about it, now your reputation is tarnished.
Agree.
And that's really difficult to come back from. I always tell my students, yeah, people get away with doing unethical things all of the time. And that can't happen forever. And so once you get caught, that's it. You've burned all of your bridges. Nobody's going to want to hire you. People aren't going to want to invest with you. So I think having that your own threshold is really important. But I also think if we're talking in terms of business ethics, organizations also have to help employees and provide them with some guidance.
Very well said. Thank you. Great response. You also mentioned that ethics seeks to resolve questions of human morality. And yet morality means different things to different people. Help me understand your own thoughts on the subject of morality and ethics.
So this is my favorite thing to discuss when we do the class, because I always distinguish between morality as our own. It's our own compass, and ethics is sort of what everyone agrees upon. And so when I have a class of 35 students and I say, what is morality? You're right. There are different answers. And that's part of why I love teaching this class so much, because people are getting their standards of morality from so many different places. And if you think about things like your family and religious backgrounds, your education, but now, whether we like it or not, social media, right? And so there are all these influences that sort of lead into somebody's morality. And so I think an ethical standard is trying to sort of modulate that. It's trying to get everybody on a similar page with the understanding that there's nothing everyone is going to agree upon. Every once in a while, I do an exercise in one of my classes and I say, okay, what can we absolutely all 100% say, these are rules for how we should behave as human beings? And, somebody always say, well, you shouldn't kill people. Okay, that's fair. But then someone else says, well, what if someone is trying to hurt someone in your family and it's self-defense? And then people think, oh, yeah, maybe in some situations. I mean, we are never all going to agree. And that's where I think the sort of the little nuances in morality are so much fun.
Well said.
And especially when we have students from different countries and different cultures, just hearing what is absolutely acceptable and normal in one place and not in someplace else, I think is so interesting. And the differences in individual morality, but then ethics around the world is something that I think businesses need to do a much better job of. You can't send employees from the US into a completely different ethical climate and expect them to know what to do. That's just a mistake on the part of the company. So doing a little bit more education around ethics, I think, is exceptionally valuable. Unfortunately, a lot of times ethics gets sort of pushed to the side as something very squishy and something that maybe we'll think about after we've done X, Y, and Z. And I really think it's got to be integral to what the company is actually doing. They've got to talk about it.
Yep. Completely agree. So again, as someone who has been teaching this subject for so many years and who's an ethics guru, what are some of the most important questions on the topic of ethics that are raised?
So normally when I start a class, this is the exact question I ask my students. What are we facing when you look at the world, what are the ethical issues? And they usually sort of start at home, and they'll say, well, pay disparities, that's an ethical issue. And they'll talk about things like work weeks. Are people being overworked because of the pandemic? And then they sort of move to globally in terms of how people are compensated working for American companies abroad. And they kind of continually get bigger and bigger. So we start talking about sustainability as an ethics issue. We talk about corporate social responsibility as an ethics issue. And even massive issues like access to education, access to healthcare, those all have an ethics component to them. And so when I think about the class in general, I always say everything is sort of held together with this thread of ethics, because ethics is everywhere. When you watch a really good television show or listen to a great podcast, it's often because there's an ethical dilemma at the center of it.
Correct.
And I think once they start to realize that, it makes for much better conversation. And then they start to realize, oh, what is happening here is not okay.
Correct.
We need to do better from an organizational standpoint. And I think that that's really important when people are leaving college and going on the job market, or when they're switching jobs, to sort of understand, how is this organization talking about ethics? What are they doing about those big problems? Because if they're not thinking about those big problems, chances are they're not thinking about internal problems in the organization in the same way either. They're one of those places that have just sort of boxed ethics up and set it on the side until later.
Well said. And which are some of the areas a lot of the organizations slip when it comes to the topic or subject of ethics?
I think a lot of times companies like to say that ethics is very important. So you go on their website, it's one of their tabs. It says ethics or values or our mission. Companies love to put out to the public that ethics is important to them. But where they fall short is in the actual implementation of ethics policies or compliance policies, whatever makes sense in terms of the type of organization that they are. So I always tell students, you can't go by what is on the website. You really have to get in there and say, okay, so what do your ethics policies look like? Are there guidelines for employees for how you expect us to behave? And if people can't answer that question, then ethics isn't actually important to them. And I've had students come back and say, in my interview, I said, you say this about ethics on your website, how is it implemented? And people cannot answer.
Correct.
That's a red flag.
Correct.
It has to match up. If you're going to talk about ethics, you need to implement it in some way. And there's no one-shot answer for what a good ethics program looks like. It's going to be iterative, but the company has to be doing something beyond making it fancy and putting it on the front page of their website, because that isn't going to help anybody.
Absolutely. So, I was speaking to a very senior woman leader who had been invited to join the board of a company under their DEI policy. And I asked her, I said, you've got a seat at the table. Are you included? And she said, well, now that you tell me, I've got a seat on the table, but nobody asked me for an opinion. Would that not be an ethical issue?
It is. The ethics is an undercurrent under diversity, equity, and inclusion. Correct. Because what is happening is women and other systematically minoritized groups are being put in these positions to check a box. That's not inclusive. That's the company saying, look at our board. It's so diverse. And they're not actually including that person. And honestly, from a business standpoint, that's a bad idea.
Correct.
If this woman has enough industry knowledge to be on a board, not listening to what she has to say is just a waste of a resource that they have there. And so I've actually been writing a lot lately about how women can be treated better within the context of organizations. And part of what drives that for me is I am an ethics professor, and I think that there are certain ways that people should be treated, particularly at work. And she's not getting the benefit of that. Other women and underrepresented groups that are being brought in to meet quotas or whatever the company is doing, it's not okay. It's not ethical from my standpoint on that.
Absolutely. And I'm on the same page as you completely. My next question, Tara, is about the accountability for ethics. I've often asked people, large company CEOs, and they say, well, we've got the guidelines and now the CHRO has to ensure it happens. And I've often said, why the CHRO? It should be the CEO. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that for it to actually work, the CEO needs to be talking about ethics. If the only way people are talked to about ethics in the organization is from emails from somebody who is disengaged from the company, the message that sends is, we have to do this. So we're doing it, but we don't care. And so top down is really important. But another really crucial piece of it is when companies are thinking about what ethical behavior looks like, they have to go to all levels of the organization. Correct. So in my class, I often say, okay, everybody, laptops, take them out and go look for some examples of codes of ethics. And what they often find is, oh, here's a code of ethics for the board of directors. Okay, well, the board of directors is 10 people, and this company has 30,000 employees. They have completely different issues that they're facing, but the 30,000 get ignored. So it's gotta take everybody into consideration. You have to know, what are the ethical roadblocks that people in middle management are facing? What are newly hired employees facing? Because I think we all know those people who have just graduated are starting in an organization, they come in with the least amount of power. Correct. And they have to have something to turn to say, oh, I can't do that. Otherwise, they're going to take the 12 bottles of scotch. Absolutely. Right? Like that's going to be the default because they just don't know how to handle it. So there's got to be a process in place, and it has to be clear. And if there isn't a process in place and someone sees something legitimately problematic happening, I always say, first you need to pause and you need to make sure that what you think is happening is actually happening, right? There's so many bits and pieces happening behind the scenes, but if you come to the conclusion that this is a legitimate ethical problem and it's being done by your boss, then you have to go to your boss's boss. And if they kind of ignore it, okay, then you have to keep going up the chain. You have to exhaust your possibilities. And if you've done that and you feel like nobody cares, nothing is happening, then you have two choices. You either blow the whistle, which is going to turn into a whole situation, right? I'm thinking about Theranos right now. It's going to absolutely blow up. Yeah. Or you leave because you don't feel good about the place that you work. And when there's this really big mismatch between sort of your morality and the ethics of an organization, that just makes for a miserable experience at work. So it's got to be top down. It's got to take everybody into consideration, and it's got to be actually talked about with employees so that they know this company actually cares about this. Well said. My next question to you is about, and I've often been asked this question, that if an employee sees unethical behavior of a senior colleague, and I think you partly answered this to go higher up, how does one handle this? It's not easy. That I will definitely say. I think if you are a more junior person seeing this happening, you need to sort of form a team. You need senior colleagues with a little bit more maybe social capital to help you figure out the road that you need to take, because being the second year junior associate and telling, your boss's boss that you think they're making ethical mistakes is not going to go well for you, right? Oftentimes you may be completely right, and the company says, "Oh, thank you for that feedback," and then you get fired, right? And they will fire you for a completely different reason.
Absolutely.
And nobody's going to say, we fired you because you found out we're doing unethical things.
True.
So I think really sort of utilizing the power of the people who have been there for a while and trying to help that solve the problem. And like I said, if that doesn't work though, and if nobody wants to talk about it, or everyone acts like you are crazy when you know that you aren't, then you know that something is going on and you need to figure out what your next move is.
Well said. I've got time for 2 more questions. My next question to you, Tara, is on culture. And culture also has an impact on ethics because, sometimes some cultures say certain norms of behavior are acceptable. Well, in other cultures, it's a complete no. What are your thoughts on how does culture impact ethics?
I think that culture literally makes or breaks the implementation of ethics. If you have a culture where they're willing to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, chances are they're willing to talk about ethics. Chances are they have a good values system. If you look at a company where for a fact that the culture is bad. You go on Glassdoor, everybody says, "Oh, it's toxic, it's terrible." They're not going to care about ethics. If they don't care about the well-being of their employees on a daily basis, they are not going to take the time or the resources to actually think about ethics and what that looks like for a company because they don't care. So I always say that a lot of times when culture is happening, and I mean, ethics is sort of baked into the culture. When people are starting companies, culture and ethics can't be something that come along later. They've got to start from the beginning. And I say that because when I think about kind of startup mode, and maybe it's the founder and some people that they know, and they're all on the same page. They have their own culture. Ethically speaking, they know what's expected to them. What happens when they get a round of funding and all of a sudden they hire 50 people and they've never talked about culture? They've never talked about ethics. Now you have what we talked about in the beginning, anarchy. You have 50 people deciding how best to operate on the behalf of you and your company. And that is a disaster. So the culture piece is key. Good culture sort of trickles down into everything. And ethics is one of those big components of it.
Absolutely. Well said. And my last question to you, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation, based on your own amazing journey and all the work that you have done on the subject of ethics, what would you say are 3 lessons or 3 learnings you want our viewers and listeners to take away from your own learnings, from your own knowledge, and from our conversation?
So when I think about ethics, it's a practice. It's something that changes over time. And I always say to my students, when you finish this class, this does not mean you are ethical. I'm sorry, you can't put that as a skill on your resume. You have to keep practicing because your morality is going to change over time. So I think the sort of malleability of it is really important.
Right.
The other one is this idea that ethics can't just come from one person. It's got to be from the top down, from the middle. Everybody needs to be involved if you're going to have an ethics program that actually works to the benefit of the employees and to the benefit of the organization.
Right.
And then the last thing, and I have a little sign in my office that says good ethics is good business. Anyone who is going to say to you, "Oh, ethics, we don't care about ethics, that's stupid," run the other way. Because if they aren't thinking about ethics and they are only focusing on the bottom line, that is an organization that is going to have problems one day. And I urge my students to not join companies like that, because I don't want them to end up with that reputation for joining a company that isn't ethical.
Fascinating. And on that note, Tara, and your 3 amazing lessons, ethics is a practice. It changes all the time. We must be prepared for, as we grow and older and mature, there will be moderation, there will be thinking that will happen, but we need to remain ethical. Ethics is for everyone. It cannot be selective in an organization. And I love your last point, which is what you have on your writing table, which is good ethics is good business. Thank you for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about business ethics. Ethics is a topic which I have been very fascinated with for the last 45 years that I have worked. And, I keep observing people on how people tend to become a little malleable when it comes to the subject of ethics. And they tend to rationalize, they tend to justify. But to me, there is no gray in honesty. It's either black or white. Thank you for speaking.
Well, and you're in good company. People have been studying ethics for 2,000 years, trying to understand how should we behave? What does that look like? And I think there's so much to talk about. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.